A black CEO was asked to leave his VIP seat, but seconds later, he grounded the plane with a single message that left everyone speechless. A black CEO was asked to leave his VIP seat, thinking the airline could humiliate him without consequence. He didn't realize that in seconds, one message from him would ground the entire plane. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true authority acts. There's been a last-minute reassignment. The sentence struck like a misfired spark in an otherwise seamless moment. Dr. Jalen Merrick paused, his polished shoes planted firmly on the marble floor of Veltran Air's private terminal, the air around him humming with a curated silence only wealth could afford. He had just presented his boarding pass, had just watched the scanner blink green, but the word from the senior flight agent sliced clean through that routine. The agent's name tag read Darven Vale. Mid-50s, crisp uniform, posture rigid enough to pass for military. But his eyes didn't meet Jalen's. They hovered somewhere over his shoulder, evasive, rehearsed. Seat 1A has been changed to 9C. Darven continued, holding a tablet just low enough to seem official, but angled just slightly away, as if shielding it. Jalen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That seat was confirmed 3 months ago, he said, his voice calm but sharpened to a scalpel's edge. Darven didn't flinch. It's a security decision. Behind them, the echo of deliberate footsteps interrupted the tension. A white man in a pale linen suit breezed past the checkpoint with effortless confidence. He didn't speak, didn't glance sideways. A junior attendant escorted him forward with the subtle body language of someone aware they were escorting a VIP, one who had just claimed 1A without resistance. Jalen's eyes followed the man silently. No boarding check. No friction. The switch had been planned. He turned back toward Darven, his voice low. Who authorized this? Internal operations, the agent replied. Not a beat of hesitation. Not a blink. Something shifted in Jalen's posture. Not large, but fundamental, like the retraction of a drawbridge before a siege. His midnight blue tailored suit didn't move. His hands didn't tremble, but his silence wasn't quiet. It was strategic. Next to him, Carrick, his assistant, stood frozen, eyes darting between Jalen, Darven, and the departing figure who now disappeared behind the brushed steel gate doors. Rin clutched the hard-sided clearance case with both hands, knuckles slightly pale. The contents inside were biometric locked, a match only Jalen could access. But what unnerved Rin wasn't the case. It was the ease, the sleight of hand, with which the man had taken 1A. Is this a mistake? Rin murmured under his breath, careful not to speak too loud. Jalen didn't respond. Not immediately. He turned his gaze past Darven toward the wall-sized transparent display showing flight departures. Falcon Flight 919 cleared for boarding. Its blue glow washed faint light across his cheekbones, but didn't soften the steel in his eyes. Darven tried to nudge the moment forward. Please comply, sir. You'll still be in priority class. It's a minor change. Is it? Jalen asked, tilting his head. He was studying the man now, not reacting, but calculating. The same way he studied contract language or defense patents. Slowly, thoroughly, with consequence in mind. Darven adjusted his collar. It won't affect your itinerary. It already has, Jalen said. A hush settled across the terminal. Not from noise. There hadn't been any, but from the lack of it. The kind of silence that suggests people are listening without looking, sensing the rules of the room bend around a conversation too delicate to interrupt. A few feet behind them, a private security officer with a silver earpiece stiffened as if awaiting escalation. He didn't move, but his right thumb grazed the touchpad on his belt holster, a silent signal that the situation was noted. But Jalen still didn't raise his voice. That wasn't his way. You don't know who I am, he said quietly, eyes still locked on Darven. But you will. Darven opened his mouth to speak again, but Jalen had already turned. Smoothly, deliberately. He walked toward gate 2, never looking back. Each footstep echoed, just slightly louder than it should have, as if the very floor beneath him knew something had shifted. Rin followed close behind, but not before casting one last look at the tablet in Darven's hand. The screen was now dark, the reassignment confirmed. As the automatic doors whispered open, Jalen's thoughts moved faster than his stride. Someone had manually displaced a sovereign tier clearance holder. That wasn't a scheduling mishap. It was a probe, a test. And whoever had taken one, they hadn't just stolen a seat. They had triggered a warning. Jalen stepped onto the jet bridge with the calm of someone who knew exactly what to do next. Not with noise, but with precision. He didn't need confrontation to make a statement. The flight itself would become the reply. He already had the tools, the clearance, the signal, and before this plane touched down again, the people behind the switch would learn the cost of miscalculating the man they tried to sideline. The door closed behind him. "You don't know who I am," Jalen had said softly. "But you will." Jalen Merrick sat silently in 9C, his spine upright, his gaze fixed straight ahead, not on the in-flight magazine in front of him or the window to his left, but on the silent, blinking lens embedded discreetly in the headrest before him. He hadn't said another word since boarding. Not to the attendants. Not to the man who now occupied the seat that was supposed to be his. The demotion was quiet, clinical, and calculated. But it wasn't over. Across the aisle in 9D, Ren Carrick, his executive assistant, shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming the side of the armrest. The ambient hum of cabin air barely masked his whispered question. "Want me to call legal?" Jalen's response was soft but firm, his voice smooth like tempered steel. "Not yet." In seat 1A, Gareth Vaughn reclined with practiced ease. His expression was blank, but it wasn't the kind of blank that came from peace, it was the kind that came from arrogance. His pale linen suit remained unwrinkled, his chin tilted ever so slightly, his hands folded loosely over his stomach like a man who had already won something. Jalen didn't watch Gareth. Not directly. He watched everything around him, the movement of the cabin crew, the unusual delays in routine announcements, the flicker in the security light above row 5 that should have been replaced. He watched like a man, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. He was waiting for confirmation, not permission. In the cockpit, Captain Merrill Dane scanned the pre-flight logs with a furrowed brow. The override that reassigned seat 1A wasn't clean. It had come from a sub-administrative relay, one that didn't carry the usual federal clearance tags. His fingers hovered above the touchscreen, pulling up the original manifest. There was Jalen Merrick, CEO of Alara Systems, tagged with clearance level 7. And then, inexplicably, the reassignment. No racional, no security trigger, just a blunt override. Dane made a note, his jaw tightening. Back in the cabin, an older attendant approached Jalen with a practiced smile. "Would you like a beverage before takeoff, sir?" Jalen didn't respond immediately. He looked up slowly, studying the man's face for any flicker of discomfort. "I'd like the name of the override handler," he said. The attendant's smile twitched just for a moment. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have that information," he replied, tone carefully neutral. He lingered for a beat too long, then moved on. Jalen didn't react. He reached down, unclasped his briefcase, and removed a thin slate device no larger than a paperback. His fingers moved with precision, tapping a concealed biometric panel beneath the case lining. The screen came alive with a soft cyan glow. A sequence of encrypted pathways opened, cascading across the interface in a silent dance of authorization checks. Network detected. Handshake initiated. Route intercept engaged. And then 3 words flashed in green. Secure route intercept initiated. He held the device low, angled away from any nearby reflection, then slowly slid it back into the briefcase. Around him, the cabin settled into pre-flight rhythm. Doors sealed, luggage bins latched, seatbelts clicked into place. "Hey, lindo wagon. That slate, did it go through?" Jalen didn't look up. He whispered, almost to himself, "Now we wait." The engines began their slow build. Beneath them, the tarmac of Veltran Air's private runway gleamed beneath artificial lights. But Jalen wasn't looking at the ground anymore. He was looking forward through the system, through the silence, through the eyes of every onboard camera that would now be rerouted into the hands of people far above commercial clearance. Somewhere in the flight data stream, a flag had already been triggered, but no one on board knew. Not yet. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm as Falcon Flight 919 pierced the upper atmosphere. Glasses clinked softly, touchscreens flickered with idle entertainment, and murmurs of casual conversation floated between rows. But in 9C, Dr. Jalen Merrick didn't move. His posture remained fixed, his fingers interlaced gently in his lap. While his right eye tracked something the others couldn't see. His contact lens, synced to a private uplink, displayed more than just cabin data. It monitored silent clearance channels. When the plane hit cruising altitude, a signal pinged across the restricted spectrum. It was faint, but it was enough. Jalen felt the pulse, less a sound than a shift in awareness. On his lens, a thin line blinked green. Clearance signal intercepted. FAIC channel 12.87. Awaiting response. Then, the reply came. Faster than expected. Unauthorized seat reassignment of clearance asset detected. Prepare escalation. The words hung in the air, invisible to everyone but him. His heart didn't race, but his breath did catch, briefly. He turned his head slightly toward Rin Carrick, seated just across the aisle in 9D. Rin's brows lifted in anticipation, as if he had been counting the seconds. They replied? He asked, voice low but urgent. Jalen nodded once. They're watching now. Rin sat back slowly, understanding the full weight of those 4 words. Meanwhile, in seat 1A, Gareth Vaughn leaned slightly to his left, fingers working a console panel embedded in the seat's armrest. From any other angle, it looked like simple fidgeting, but Jalen's lens magnified the screen reflection against the polished tray table. He saw command strings, biometric proximity parameters being entered line by line. Garrett's posture was relaxed, but the code was anything but innocent. He's not just a passenger, Jalen murmured to himself. He's testing proximity. The realization burned behind his eyes. The seat reassignment hadn't just been disrespect. It had been tactical, calculated. Proximity was everything when it came to neural asset security. At sovereign tier clearance, even a meter mattered, and Gareth was now within exactly that. In the rear galley, crew member Ellis Jarrett adjusted a service panel and looked around to make sure no passengers were watching. With a practice motion, he tapped a sequence beneath a hidden latch. A small embedded screen slid outward, revealing a crew-only diagnostic log. Ellis's eyes scanned quickly. His training told him what to look for. And there it was, an override order tagged to seat 1A, executed manually. No route signature, no timestamp hash from operations, no biometric authorization trail. Sir, Ellis whispered, pressing the intercom button with a shaking thumb. Bridge, this is aft galley. I need to speak to Captain Dane. Now, up in the cockpit, Captain Merrill Dane heard the buzz and pressed the receiver. Go ahead. Ellis's voice was tight with disbelief. One, it was placed manually by someone outside of operations. Dane's hand paused above the comm controls. Repeat that. Manual insertion. Unregistered authorization. No trail from ground systems. Dane's jaw clenched. He tapped into the cabin diagnostics, toggling through the feed. The internal manifest still listed 1A as reassigned by Opscommand de Sigma, a tag he hadn't seen used in over 6 years. And even then, only under temporary federal clearances, not commercial lanes. You're telling me someone inserted an agent into proximity with a protected tech principle? Dane asked, already knowing the answer. Ellis didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. And he's within 1 meter of a neural carrier. Captain Dane stared at the screen. His fingers hovered above the Emergency Operations tab. Every pilot hoped never to touch it. It was only for breaches, for incidents that could shift national policy or compromise security doctrines. He pressed it once, arming the directive response mode, but not yet executing. Then, quietly, with eyes never leaving the monitor, he whispered, Then this isn't a flight anymore. It's a breach. Jalen stood. No warning. No announcement. just the quiet scrape of his chair as he rose, folding his hands as he stepped into the aisle. The passengers around him glanced up, their expressions curious, some uneasy. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, masking the tension that had just entered the air. But Jalen didn't speak to them. His focus was forward, each step deliberate, each footfall a reminder that silence could carry more weight than anger. He passed row after row of settled travelers, the ambient hush growing as eyes followed him. The sleek lights above flickered briefly as if responding to his presence. Some assumed he was heading to the lavatory. Others sensed something deeper, something off-kilter. In seat 1A, Gareth Vaughn noticed him approaching and shifted only slightly, crossing one leg over the other, chin tilted in calculated amusement. Jalen stopped beside him. "You're too close," Jalen said quietly. Gareth didn't blink. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, his voice smooth with practiced poise, like a man confident that the pieces were falling in his favor. His pale linen suit was crisp, untouched by the slight humidity of the cabin, but his fingers betrayed a slight tremor where they rested on the embedded console. Jalen leaned in, close enough that the words didn't have to rise above a whisper. "And this aircraft," he said, "is exactly where I wanted it to be, high enough to trigger a reroute when a protected clearance is compromised." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "You triggered it?" he asked, almost disbelieving. Without answering, Jalen raised two fingers to the center of his chest. He tapped once. A faint hum vibrated through the air, subtle yet unmistakable. The light of a buried transmitter glowed faintly beneath the threads of his tailored suit. It wasn't a threat. It was proof. Garrett's smirk faded. His posture stiffened just slightly, but enough to betray his recalculating mind. "That's not possible," he muttered. "That would require federal alignment, real-time infrastructure support." Jalen tilted his head. "I helped write the protocol." Behind them, a soft static crinkled over the cabin speakers. Then a voice, firm, calm, authoritative, cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Captain Merrill Dane, "due to an operational error, we will be diverting to Veltran Base for immediate inspection. This will not affect your safety. Please remain seated." The cabin erupted in hushed confusion. Passengers glanced at one another. Some looked out the windows, noticing the slight change in tilt as the aircraft began to bank right. Others pressed call buttons that were promptly ignored by the crew. A few travelers began murmuring, "Veltran Base? That wasn't on the route. Wasn't even commercial." Gareth turned toward the front, jaw tightening. "They activated it," he said, more to himself than anyone. Directive response mode. His hand moved instinctively toward the console embedded in his seat, but the screen was already dimming, locked out by the captain's override. No one could stop what had been set in motion. Jalen said nothing more. He straightened, casting one last glance down at the console that Gareth had tried to manipulate. "Next time," he said clearly, his voice audible now to anyone in earshot, "verify who the plane really belongs to." Then he turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving the rest of the cabin in tense, confused silence. Behind him, Gareth Vaughn didn't move. Not yet. Not while the aircraft turned toward a facility built to receive threats, not passengers. Not while the man he thought was displaced now controlled the altitude, the signal, and the consequences. And this time, there would be no undoing the seat he had taken. The cabin lights dimmed as Falcon Flight 919 banked subtly eastward, the nose tilting almost imperceptibly toward Veltran Base. No passenger would have noticed unless they were watching the altitude meter or the direction markers on the in-seat display. But Jalen Merrick didn't need a screen. He felt the shift. He had been waiting for it. Across the aisle, Gareth Vaughn's fingers hovered above the console embedded in his armrest. The screen that once glowed green now flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. System lock engaged. He tapped again, more forcefully, but the interface went dark, leaving only a blinking cursor, as if mocking him. He straightened in his seat, lips pressing into a thin line. Whatever privilege he thought he had on this aircraft was evaporating with every passing second. In 9C, Ren Carrick leaned closer, his voice a cautious murmur barely audible over the cabin hum. What happens now? Jalen didn't look away from the feed displayed through his lens overlay. We land, he said simply, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. And then I give them exactly what they were trying to intercept. Below them, inside the deep steel corridors of Veltran Base, the Flight Operations Control Room pulsed to life. Monitors lit up with reroute confirmations, red zone proximity alerts, and a flashing authorization tag marked with a Sovereign class watermark. One controller, a wiry man named Calden Rourke, read aloud. Confirmed breach of proximity to clearance carrier. Red designation. Rerouting confirmed by asset. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Prepare protocol response, said the base supervisor, a stern-jawed man named Laris Vane. Dulk Feeda. Intercept team standing by. Back on the plane, Jalen adjusted the cuff of his midnight blue suit. With measured control, he tapped a sequence onto the surface of his slate device. A silent, encrypted signal was sent directly to the Federal Aerospace Integrity Corps. It read, Falcon Flight 919. Breach confirmed. Intercept secure. Request attainment protocol on 1A passenger. A brief pause followed, 2 heartbeats of stillness. Then, a single reply materialized in clean white text. Authorized. Jalen closed the device slowly, as if sealing the moment shut. He leaned back against the headrest, lifted the untouched glass of water on his tray table, and took a sip. The silence that followed felt heavier than the aircraft's hull. Behind him, Gareth suddenly unbuckled his seatbelt with a sharp click and stood, stepping into the aisle with false composure. You think you can just... A flight attendant in a gray-trimmed uniform stepped forward immediately. Sir, please be seated, he said, arms partially extended in a practiced gesture of non-confrontation. Gareth ignored him. This is absurd, he snapped, raising his voice. You can't do this. Jalen didn't rise. He merely tilted his head slightly toward the commotion. His gaze met Gareth's, unflinching. I didn't do it, he said quietly. Gareth froze. Jalen's voice lowered, smooth as glass, but sharp enough to cut through the pressurized air. You did the moment you thought I wouldn't. Gareth's jaw tightened, but the crew member didn't move aside. Another steward, taller and broader, had stepped into the aisle behind him, silent, ready. Gareth looked between them, his confidence faltering. For a few seconds, no one in the cabin moved. The tension coiled like a spring. Even passengers several rows back paused their screens, sensing something critical playing out just outside their line of sight. Above them, the pilot's voice returned, polite but steely. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we complete our brief descent into Veltran Base. This landing is a standard procedure under Operational Review Protocol. We appreciate your cooperation. The words were vague by design, but those who understood knew exactly what was unfolding. And as the wheels beneath them began to lower with a soft mechanical groan, the cabin remained silent. Not out of confusion, but out of the awareness that something more than turbulence had shifted this flight's course. This wasn't just a reroute. It was a reckoning. Jalen reached forward and calmly retrieved the silver briefcase from under his seat. His fingers lingered on the biometric lock for a second before setting it upright on his lap. He didn't glance at Gareth again. And Gareth, no longer posturing, stood still, his breathing shallow, his options vanishing with altitude. The Falcon Flight 919 was now under full directive response mode. Gareth Vaughn's override had triggered more than just a diversion. It had triggered exposure. And, for the first time since boarding, he understood who he was really sitting near. Jalen Merrick, Clearance Sovereign 4, architect of the reroute protocol he had just activated. The aircraft dipped slightly again as it aligned with the encrypted corridor leading to Veltran's secure docking path. The clouds outside parted in quiet submission, and as the first lights of the base runway flickered into view through the forward windows, Jalen said once more, without looking back, I didn't do it. You did the moment you thought I wouldn't. The moment the landing gear kissed the tarmac at Veltran Base, the tension inside Falcon Flight 919 crystallized into something heavy and electric. The deceleration was sharp, deliberate, unlike the smooth touches of civilian runways. Just outside the starboard windows, a matte black escort vehicle surged alongside the aircraft, tires humming in synchrony with the jet's own slowing momentum. Its roof bore no markings, no insignia, only a single red strobe that pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside the cabin, Jalen Merrick didn't move. He remained still in seat 9C, hands resting on his thighs, his gaze fixed on the headrest before him, not in boredom, but in calculation. Every detail had been accounted for, every piece placed with intent. But one variable still moved freely: Gareth Vaughn. Row 1A rattled with sudden motion as Gareth shot upward from his seat. "This is illegal," he barked, his voice sharp with panic. "I'm a contracted strategist for Ekron Systems." A young male crew member stepped into the aisle, unshaken. His uniform was crisp, his tone almost too calm. "Sir, this aircraft has entered a federal compliance zone. Please remain seated." But Gareth wasn't listening. His breath had shortened. His collar seemed to tighten with every second. He stepped forward, but the sound of the galley hatch opening sliced through the tension like a blade. Two men in plain clothes boarded swiftly from the side galley door. One was tall, carrying a biometric scanner the size of paperback. The other, broader, with a hand resting over a concealed restraint baton. Their movements were quick but rehearsed, like men who had done this before, many times. The taller one moved straight to Jalen. No words, just the quiet whine of the scanner activating. It passed once over Jalen's chest. A soft tone, pure, unwavering, filled the cabin. On the scanner's display, a glowing designation pulsed in gold. "Clearance level, Sovereign 4. Asset verified." Several passengers gasped softly. One covered his mouth. Garrett's mouth parted in disbelief. "He's not even federal," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "They said he didn't have level 4. Jalen rose, smooth and silent, as if drawn up by invisible strings. He met Gareth's stare, not with anger, but with a kind of solemn finality. His voice was quiet, but unshakable. "You were lied to," Jalen said. "And the moment you sat in my seat, you verified that lie with your own body." The second officer now stepped toward Gareth. His scanner moved toward the strategist's jacket, but before it could make contact, Gareth jerked back. "No," Gareth said, stumbling. "No, this isn't protocol." He turned. One step, a lunge toward the aisle. But that was all he got. With a sharp pop and a flash of blue, the taser wires caught him across the chest. His body locked, spasmed, and crumpled to the floor. The sound of his fall was loud, too loud, in the hushed silence of the first-class cabin. No one reached for their phones. No one screamed. The silence was not fear. It was reverence for something larger than all of them, now unfolding before their eyes. Garrett's fingers twitched where he lay, groaning faintly. The taller officer retracted the taser leads and signaled to the crew. The team moved in, quick and silent, lifting Garrett's limp form onto a stretcher with practiced ease. A sterile mask was placed over his face. One passenger asked, "Is he all right?" But no one answered. Captain Dane appeared for the cockpit, stepping carefully into the aisle. His face was pale, jaw tight, with realization that his cabin had nearly become the scene of a successful breach, one that could have rewritten not just security policy, but global infrastructure. Jalen turned to face him, posture composed, voice calm. "I'll debrief from the inspection room," he said. The message was sent. Now the consequence arrives. The chamber door sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss, isolating the interior from the outside corridors of Veltran Base. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting sharp white lines across the polished steel of the debriefing table. Jalen Merrick, still in his midnight blue suit, stepped forward without hesitation and placed the encrypted briefcase on the table's center pad. The device responded to his touch with a soft chirp. A ring of light blinked blue, then green. Across from him, Commander Alric Thorne observed with a calculating gaze. The man was all angular features and a lean, hawk-like frame. His uniform bore no insignia, save a single silver badge over his left breast, Federal Asset Integrity Command. As the briefcase opened, Auric's eyes narrowed at the soft holographic interface that ballooned into the air above the case. Jalen's voice broke the silence. Here's what they were after: the AI clause amendments. The draft no one has seen until now. Auric tilted his head as lines of dense protocol language scrolled in midair: clauses, subclauses, encryption headers, sovereign transfer notations, and audit triggers embedded into the language itself. He tapped a command into his tablet, cross-referencing in real time. They wanted to intercept the language and inject loopholes before tomorrow's vote, Auric muttered. His voice was low, deliberate, and edged with suspicion. "And the man in 1A?" he asked, already suspecting. Jalen didn't blink. A corporate provocateur, Gareth Vaughn, operating under a shadow credential issued by a suspended division of Ekron Systems. They never expected I'd monitor cabin proximity. Auric's jaw clenched. "Why didn't you flag it at the gate?" Jalen's eyes hardened. "Because if I had, we'd have nothing. Just accusations and denials. Now we have data, logs, traces, a live capture. From a side panel near the door, a second screen lit up, live feed from the main hangar. Technicians in dark coveralls swarmed the aircraft like ants, instruments blinking, scanners buzzing softly as they scanned every square inch of the interior. A focus pair had disassembled the undercarriage of Seat 1A. The video zoomed in on a small, seemingly innocuous device, no bigger than a breath mint, tucked deep into the seat frame. One of the techs held it up. "We found it," he reported over comms. "Passive relay with scan-sync functionality, tuned to detect neural signature variances at a range of 0.8 meters. Auric swore under his breath. A receiver. Jalen didn't move. Not just that. It was programmed to scan and clone compliance signals. Mine specifically. The screen shifted again, this time to the internal flight logs. Red markers flashed across a 3-second interval, beginning with Garrett's biometric interaction with the armrest console and ending with a failed silent override attempt that triggered the descent protocol. "They were trying to clone my compliance signal," Jalen said, stepping toward the projection. "If they'd succeeded, they could have mimicked a sovereign tier asset, access corridors, airspace permissions, even federal compliance corridors." Auric's face darkened. "That's not theft. That's espionage against national infrastructure." Silence fell again, heavy, grim. Jalen turned slightly, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "Which is why I didn't report it at the gate. I let it happen, because now we have proof." He looked up, his tone sharpening. "You can scrub passenger logs, trace routing instructions, isolate the signal gaps. But what you won't find is deniability. Not this time." Commander Thorne crossed his arms. His mind was already moving through the next 10 steps: federal charges, intelligence briefings, doctrine reviews, council votes. "You understand," he said slowly. "This breach puts their entire oversight strategy into question. If someone at Ekron signed off on this, they did," Jalen interrupted. "How about the metasign chain embedded in the amendment file? It's hidden under Clause 12.6, restructured to carry signal footprints if tampered with. They thought I was just transporting a draft. What I actually carried was trap." Outside, the aircraft hangar lights dimmed briefly as the scan completed. Analysts logged the final findings, sealed the evidence, and began locking down all peripheral access logs to prevent interference. Back in the chamber, Auric walked slowly around the table, never taking his eyes off Jalen. "You grounded a jet in midair," he said quietly. "You risked a federal corridor disruption to catch one man." Jalen's reply was immediate, steady. "No, I grounded a plane to expose a network. One man just happened to sit too close." Auric stopped at the far end of the room. The weight of the moment settled between them like fog. "So what happens next?" Jalen stepped toward the door and paused, the silver edge of the briefcase glinting under the fluorescent light. "You do what you need to," he said. "This base is your domain. But the world's going to hear about what was attempted, and they'll know we didn't just react. We set the terms." With that, he opened the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, sterile, humming with the low pulse of power converters and sealed corridors. Jalen turned once more, gaze level. "I grounded the plane. but their entire network's about to fall. The breach footage played in silence. Inside the secured observation chamber at Veltran Base, the final frame hung frozen on the central monitor. Gareth Vaughn's right hand hovered above the armrest console in Seat 1A, fingers extended, caught mid-tap. 3 rows behind him, seated with his hands calmly folded, Jalen Merrick watched. Not with alarm, not with panic, with precision, with quiet expectation. The timestamp blinked faintly on the screen's corner, 3 seconds before the breach alert had triggered across the aerospace network. "He baited me," Gareth muttered from behind the thick glass partition, his voice brittle. "He planned this from the start." The federal officer beside him, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Oren Malik, remained silent. The room smelled faintly of sterilized metal and recycled air. Oren tapped the side of his tablet and brought up the live Fallout feed. Graphs, headlines, and communication logs bloomed across the screen like a swarm. "You're looking at the wrong frame," Oren said finally. He swiped again, bringing up a split-view shot, Garrett's access attempt on one side, and a mirrored encryption ping from Jalen's suit on the other. "That was the moment the network flagged you. Not this moment. That one." He pointed to the screen. "The second your hand moved forward." Gareth swallowed. His posture, once rigid, smug, had deflated in the last 12 hours. Sweat dotted his temples despite the chill of the chamber. "They told me he didn't have active clearance. They said he'd registered dormant." "They lied," Oren said simply. "And you believe them. That's on you." Back above ground, inside the secure strategy room of Alara Systems' Coastal HQ, the board of directors sat in an emergency closed session. Jalen stood at the head of the matte black conference table. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting reflections off the encrypted hollow projector humming quietly between them. On the display, the original seating map of Falcon Flight 919, with the override path glowing red, showing exactly where it had come from. "Ekron Systems. We have to delay the treaty vote," said one director, a tall man with silver streaks in his beard. "This taints the document's neutrality." "No," Jalen replied firmly, voice low but unwavering. "We finalize it." There was a pause. "And we include a new clause. Call it the Vaughn Clause." The directors exchanged glances. One leaned forward. "Clarify. Any future AI system bound to autonomous decision-making," Jalen said, "must embed detectable signal shifts if altered within proximity to sovereign-level encryption. If tampering happens, any tampering, it triggers an autonomous flag. Public. Unreversible." Rinkarik, seated at Jalen's right, tapped out a quick message to the summit committee. His face was pale, but his hands were steady. "What about public exposure?" another director asked. "Do we go on record?" Jalen shook his head. "No, let Ekron sweat first. The footage hasn't been leaked. Yet, but not far away, inside a data vault owned by a private ethics collective, someone else had already acted. A whistleblower, anonymous, strategic, sent a compressed file to the Independent Oversight Council. It contained internal Ekron memos marked high clearance priority. One particular message, signed off by Ekron's VP of Tactical Solutions, read, "Proceed with Falcon Flight Intercept. Override confirmed. Subject Merrick remains unaware." Except, of course, Jalen had been aware the entire time. Back at Veltran Base, Gareth remained under sealed detainment. No public charges had been filed. No press had access to the facility. But the investigation around him was growing. Inside his dim holding room, a single light flickered above as a new image was shown, this one a frame from a different angle. The underseat relay device. Installed by Gareth. Activated when Jalen stepped within a 3-meter radius. Designed to clone the proximity-based compliance signature embedded in his neural clearance tag. Oren Malik folded his arms. "You weren't trying to spy. You were trying to duplicate the signal." Gareth didn't respond. "You could have walked away," Oren added. "Instead, you reached for the console." Garrett's breath shook. "He baited me. You underestimated him," Oren replied coldly. "And now your entire company will pay for that." Back at Alaris, the clause had already been uploaded to the treaty's digital annex. The Vaughn Clause. It would appear in every international draft going forward. The council vote was still on schedule, and Ezrin leaned toward Jalen to whisper, "They're reviewing it now." Jalen didn't even nod. He simply stared out the window. Miles below them, Garrett's image flickered again, still paused in that last frame. His outstretched hand. Jalen's steady gaze. A single moment of strategic miscalculation. "He baited me," Gareth whispered. "He planned this from the start." The crew smirked, confident their demand would go unchallenged, unaware that every system, every protocol, and every security override had already been anticipated and activated by the CEO. If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when skill meets strategy, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The moment the Vaughn clause was read aloud, the marble-lit auditorium held its breath. Jalen Merrick stood still at the center of the summit stage, his presence quiet but charged, like voltage behind polished glass. He didn't look down at his notes. He didn't need to. Every syllable that followed came not from preparation, but from lived strategy. "This clause," he said, his voice firm and measured, "exists because someone tried to steal control of the very systems meant to secure our future." He paused, letting the silence deepen. "They used a seat. I used a signal." Murmurs rippled through the audience. International delegates, AI ethicists, aerospace directors, legal scholars, all seated beneath the golden arc of the Hall of Ascension. They weren't expecting theater, but they had just witnessed doctrine forged in real time. By the end of the reading, the room stood. Unanimously. Cameras flashed. Transcripts were logged. But for Jalen, the summit was merely a terminal point, an end point of a trajectory launched the moment he was reassigned to 9C. Hours later, in the secure penthouse chamber reserved for post-summit liaisons, Defense Counselor Darven Vale poured 2 glasses of quietly aged Vervian Black Reserve. The room was subdued, paneled in steelwood, lined with thermal-blocking walls, and sound-dampened by regulation. Only the low hum of external air filtration could be heard, until Darven spoke. "What you did on that plane," he said, handing Jalen a glass, "wasn't just legal defense. It was strategic warfare." Jalen didn't drink. He tilted the glass, watching the light bend across the amber surface. "I simply responded to what they thought I wouldn't notice." Darven leaned against the curved armrest of the chair across from him. "You escalated without raising a voice. You diverted an entire aircraft without triggering panic. You let him sit in 1A and let him incriminate himself with posture alone." Jalen gave a faint smile. "I gave him room to fail." "On purpose?" Darven asked. Jalen exhaled through his nose, placing the untouched glass down on the table. "I've spent years writing clearance architecture, but this was the first time I got to enforce it firsthand. They didn't know who I was because I didn't make it known. But the moment they touched proximity, they gave me all the legal traction I needed." Darven stared at him, almost with disbelief. "So you staged the breach?" "No, Jalen replied. I staged the response." The lights outside the panoramic window blinked like distant satellites as automated drones traced the summit's perimeter. Darven stood slowly, lifting his glass halfway. To the man who grounded a flight with one message. But Jalen didn't raise his glass. He didn't flinch. "It wasn't the message," he said quietly. "It was the seat they took, and the price they paid for underestimating who was watching." Gareth Vaughn's head hung low as the containment chamber's thick door hissed shut behind him. His wrists still bore the faint impressions of the restraint clasps. The light in the room was clinical, white, cold, and designed to flatten hope. He sat motionless at the center of the narrow steel bench, flanked by reinforced walls lined with echo-dampening panels. The kind used not just to contain sound, but to strip silence of meaning. Every tick of time was swallowed into a suffocating stillness. Then the door unlocked with a soft hydraulic sigh. A man in a dark charcoal suit stepped inside. His movements were deliberate, composed. He carried no weapon, just a matte black tablet in his hand and a subtle gleam in his eyes. His name was Oren Malik, lead investigator for the Federal Council on Aerospace Integrity. He had read every dossier, flagged every anomaly, and flown to Veltran Base specifically to interrogate the man who had triggered one of the most significant airborne compliance breaches in a decade. "You don't look like someone who started an international scandal," Oren said, his voice even, without mockery. Gareth didn't look up. "I didn't know," he muttered. "They told me he wouldn't escalate." Oren approached slowly, tapping the tablet. The screen lit up with scrolling data, live news banners, and economic alerts. Well, he did. And the consequences have started to land faster than this jet ever did. He turned the screen toward Gareth. "Your company's stock has been frozen. 3 directors resigned this morning. The AI Oversight Council just opened a full criminal ethics review. Your clearance has been revoked, your contract suspended, and your shadow credential flagged in 3 international systems." Gareth's fingers twitched. They said he was soft, that he would file a complaint, nothing more. "Is that why you took seat 1A? Oren asked, folding his arms. "To sit near him without detection, run scans, trigger neural relays, and report back before anyone noticed?" "I was told the scan would be passive," Gareth snapped, the desperation leaking into his voice now. "No contact, no breach." "But there was a breach," Oren said, voice like a blade. "And it wasn't just protocol. It was assumption. You assumed the man wouldn't act." Gareth leaned forward now, hands pressed against his knees. "It was just a seat," he said, quieter this time. "That's all it was." Oren stepped closer. His tone hardened. "It was never just a seat. It was a symbol, a boundary, a test. And you failed it the second you thought he wouldn't notice, wouldn't retaliate, wouldn't trigger the failsafe that diverted an entire aircraft to a restricted federal airfield in under 8 minutes. Gareth sat back slowly, eyes hollow. He grounded the plane himself? No, orden corrective. He didn't just ground the plane. He grounded your strategy, your company, your future. He made sure the system recognized proximity breaches to sovereign-level clearance holders as airborne threats. From now on, any such breach auto-triggers reroute. No discretion, no delay. The law changed, Madare. The weight of that landed hard. Gareth opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flicked up toward the flickering surveillance camera in the corner. "We didn't think he had the authority." Oren gave a cold smile. "And that," he said, "is what ended you. You didn't think he had the authority to act, but he didn't need it, because his presence in that seat came with a doctrine you didn't study. And when your fingers brushed that console, when your body crossed into neural relay range, the system knew. He wrote the trigger. He anticipated you before you even stepped into the terminal." Silence followed, a silence filled with realizations that couldn't be undone. Then the lights in the chamber dimmed by 2 degrees, an alert that transfer was imminent. Across the base, in a secured observation suite, Dr. Jalen Merrick sat in front of a widescreen panel, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on encrypted footage now being uploaded to the Council's core servers. Every second of the breach, every flicker of signal manipulation, every frame Gareth had believed invisible was now encoded into permanent record. Alric Thorne stood beside him, arms crossed. The sequence held. Your decoy placement in 9C kept the asset untraceable. No one even knew the carrier was 3 rows behind. Jalen didn't nod. He only scrolled forward, watching frame by frame as the breach unfolded exactly as anticipated. Then he spoke. "This protocol works, but we can't stop here." Alric raised an eyebrow. "You want to expand it?" "We need layers," Jalen said. "Tiers of proximity classification. Not just for me, for others. Asset-grade passengers, neural clearance carriers, CEOs, engineers, diplomats, anyone flagged as sovereign level." He leaned back. "We can't rely on luck or one-time detection. We need systemic deterrence." Alric nodded slowly. "You want this to be more than a one-time defense?" "No," Jalen replied, eyes still on the footage. The screen paused, Garrett's hand frozen mid-motion, just before touching the console. "I want it to be a permanent deterrent." 3 days after the diversion of Falcon Flight 919, Veltran Air released a statement to the press. It was brief, polished, and utterly deflective. The reassignment of Seat 1A was the result of an unintentional system fault, The spokesperson announced from a glass podium in the Veltran Tower Press Hall, his voice rehearsed and void of conviction. "We are reviewing our procedures to ensure this does not happen again." But the words rang hollow. Behind closed servers and anonymous firewalls, the truth had already begun to surface. Somewhere in a private, encrypted channel, a file was uploaded. It was labeled simply, route override _919.redacttrail. Inside it, the digital log of a senior routing officer authorizing a reassignment pulsed in glowing red. The routing decision, backdated and misclassified as automated, had in fact been manually executed under an obscure but traceable priority tag. Yes, priority. It didn't take long for those 3 characters to ignite a blaze. Within hours, internal security analysts tied the tag directly to Ekron Systems, a corporate giant with known interests in AI ethics manipulation and proximity targeting. Whispers turned to murmurs. Memos circulated. Screenshots leaked. An anonymous employee of Veltran's scheduling department sent an email to the oversight watchdogs. This wasn't a glitch. It was a handoff. Jalen Merrick, however, remained silent. He didn't appear in public. He didn't give interviews. While media networks scrambled to piece together narratives, Jalen boarded a nondescript Falcon-class shuttle and flew to a secure installation hidden beneath the northeastern ridge of Veltran Province, a facility few had ever seen. Fewer still had clearance to enter. Inside, beneath layers of kinetic shielding and sonic baffles, he stepped into the neural vault chamber, a space reserved for the storage and calibration of sovereign AI signature maps. At his side was a black case, sleek and silent, marked only with an Alaris system seal. Technicians turned as he entered, recognizing the man instantly. No one greeted him verbally. Instead, one of the lead engineers, a lean, gray-templed man named Corin Thale, walked forward. "Dr. Merrick," Corin said with a slight nod. "We've cleared Bay 3. Jalen opened the case, revealing a single device. It was no larger than a matchbox, encased in translucent alloy, its surface pulsing faintly. "This," he said, lifting it carefully, "was forged from the interference they tried to extract." Corin leaned in. "A trace chip." "More than that. This was tuned during the breach. It captured the signature anomaly Gareth Vaughn attempted to mirror. It holds a shadow echo of my neural print and how it was targeted." Corin blinked. "That's unprecedented. You want us to reverse engineer it?" Jalen looked directly at him. "I want you to turn it into a tracker. One that flags any attempt, anywhere, to clone a sovereign neural print. It needs to detect, document, and alert. Real time." Corin nodded slowly, the weight of the request sinking in. "And the designation?" Jalen's voice was calm, measured, but there was steel in it. "Signal 1A," he said. "Let them remember where this began." Rin Carrick stepped through the sleek, glass-paneled entrance of Alaris HQ, his hand wrapped tightly around a silver envelope that caught the light like it contained something far more dangerous than paper. The air inside the lobby buzzed with the usual low murmurs of executives passing, but his presence seemed to still it. The receptionist looked up, then quickly looked away. Everyone knew by now. Falcon Flight 919 had landed where it shouldn't have, and someone had tried to steal from the man no one ever dared cross. He didn't pause to chat or offer greetings. He made his way directly to the executive floor, the envelope held like a blade between fingers that barely moved. When he reached Jalen's office, the biometric panel scanned his face, then opened with a hiss. Jalen was already standing by the glass wall, staring out over the city, his reflection cut by the divide in the window. Rin didn't speak. He simply handed over the envelope. Jalen turned, took it without a word, and peeled it open. Inside was the tribunal's letter, handwritten, sealed, and signed with a formal insignia burned into the lower corner. His eyes moved slowly across the page. "Your decision to remain calm in the face of provocation is the standard we now reference as passive integrity level alpha." He read it twice, then folded it, placed it gently on the edge of the table, and exhaled through his nose, steady, silent, like a weight releasing beneath the surface. Rin finally broke the quiet. They archived a copy in the International Ethics Council vault, he said, his voice low, beside the original Geneva Compliance Code. Jalen nodded faintly, but didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the window. Outside, a Falcon-class aircraft lifted into the overcast morning sky, silent, deliberate, exact. 3 days later, Jalen stepped onto a different Falcon-class jet, unmarked, high clearance, and freshly serviced under directive watch. He said nothing as he boarded, but the cabin crew stood taller, straighter. Their uniforms seemed neater, their movements crisper. It was empty, pristine, polished, not assigned to any other passenger. Not anymore. It was waiting for him. Jalen didn't recline. He didn't celebrate. He simply slid into the seat, placed his tablet flat on the armrest, and opened a draft document titled, The Sovereign Passenger Dignity Charter. The charter was no longer a concept. It was language sharpened by breach, written now with clarity only earned by confrontation. Its clauses covered proximity protections, clearance lock enforcement, and a zero override doctrine for passengers holding sovereign identifiers. No reroute could occur unless the asset authorized it. No reassignment could bypass biometric confirmation. No corporation could ever again use routing as a tool for strategic coercion. Each word he revised was measured, not just legal, personal. The lights dimmed slightly as pre-flight systems initialized. Jalen looked up. The overhead readout blinked. Corridor R44A, clear by Falcon reroute protocol. The captain's voice came through the speakers, confident, rehearsed, but this time with something more. Respect. Today's flight will follow a new corridor, clear by directive from the Falcon reroute protocol. Jalen didn't react, but a few rows back, a young boy leaned toward his father. That's the guy who grounded a whole plane, the boy whispered. His father nodded, voice quiet with awe. That's the guy who changed how the sky works. Weeks later, beneath the towering steel spires of the International Summit Complex, silence ruled a dim, glass-encased corridor. Fluorescent strips cast long reflections across the polished obsidian floor, guiding the few who walked this hall toward a singular object, not grand, not complex, but weighted with consequence. Encased in bulletproof glass, under white clinical light, was a simple boarding stub. Falcon Flight 919, Row 1A. Status: canceled. A platinum plaque gleamed beneath it, engraved with 3 words that had reshaped an entire doctrine. 1 seat. 1 message. 1 doctrine. Security Officer Darven Vale stood silently by the case, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. He had been briefed on the story, like every officer here, but the weight of it, of what that stub had set in motion, never faded. He turned as a young technician approached, his ID tag reading, Jalen Merrick, Ethics Training Development. That's it, Kellen asked, stopping in front of the glass. The actual stub? Darnell gave a slow nod. It rerouted a plane, collapsed a sabotage plot, and forced every Continental airline to rewrite their training modules. That stub rewrote the air. Kellen leaned closer, reading the time-stamped barcode. And he never even yelled. Miles away, in a quiet lounge aboard a secured aircraft, Dr. Jalen Merrick sat alone. The cabin was quiet, curtains drawn, lights low, the world reduced to soft turbulence and the hum of encrypted systems. In front of him, a glass of water remained untouched. He wasn't looking out the window. He was reading something on his tablet, a letter handwritten by the tribunal that had overseen the post-incident ethics review, the standard we now reference as passive integrity level alpha. He tapped the screen once, saving it into his private archive. Then slowly, he closed the file. His gaze drifted upward to seat 1A. It was empty, polished, waiting for him. No one questioned it now. No override requests. No misfired boarding assignments. Not after what had happened on Falcon Flight 919. The cabin door opened briefly, and Rin Carrick stepped in, carrying a silver envelope. They installed it, he said quietly, handing over a photo. It showed the case, the stub, the plaque. Jalen looked at it for a long moment, his fingers brushing the edge of the print. They'll remember the seat, he he said. And the doctrine, Ren added. No halen replaith. They'll remember the decision. Not to shout, not to escalate, just to redirect the sky. Meanwhile, in training centers across the globe, changes rippled outward. Pilots were retrained. Flight staff underwent new proximity ethics evaluations. A new question was added to every onboarding exam. What is the Vaughan Clause, and how do you identify a sovereign asset, even without visual markers? The answer was no longer just a matter of policy. It was a matter of respect, of survival. In one such training center, a boy sat in the front row of a flight ethics class. He was 12, eyes sharp, posture upright. His name tag read, L. Merrick. The instructor, unaware of the boy's lineage, clicked to the next slide. A blurred screenshot appeared. A man in seat 9C, calm, silent, while another reached toward a console 3 rows ahead. This, the instructor said, is the moment the breach occurred. The man in 9C did not intervene physically. He initiated a reroute protocol through his sovereign transmitter. The system responded not to force, but to verification. At the end of class, L. Merrick approached the instructor. Do they know who he was? He asked. The instructor hesitated. Some do, but we don't use names in this module. Only the message. That evening, as the boy returned home, he found his father in the study. Jalen was reviewing revisions to a draft titled the Sovereign Passenger Dignity Charter. It outlined global protections for high-clearance individuals from forced reassignments, profiling, and unauthorized proximity. They talk about you today, the boy said, setting down his bag. Jalen looked up. They did. They taught us about a CEO who grounded a flight without yelling. A quiet beat passed. Then Jalen smiled faintly, leaned back, and asked, Did they say what seat he was in? The boy nodded. Yeah, 9C. But he was supposed to be in 1A. Jalen stood slowly, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. His voice was soft, but certain. Remember that, son. It's not always about where they put you. Then he added, It's about how you land when they think you won't. Seconds later, the CEO's message triggered a full plane halt, leaving the crew stunned and every passenger witnessing the power of decisive authority. If you believe real authority combines timing, strategy, and impact, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights prejudice, abuse of authority, and the power of composure and strategic action in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every passenger.